The moment you stop speaking, the room starts revealing itself. People panic in silence. They fill it. They expose themselves inside it. And the one who stays silent controls everything. Machiavelli called silence the most dangerous weapon a man can carry, because silence doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it doesn't beg, it waits. Most men are afraid of silence. They rush to speak, they rush to explain, they rush to defend themselves, and every word they add shrinks their power. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He understood something brutal about human nature. The man who speaks first is usually the man who needs approval. Silence, on the other hand, signals abundance. When you don't rush to speak, people assume you don't need to, and what you don't need, you control. In any room, there are two energies, the one trying to be understood and the one being observed. Machiavelli always chose the second, because the observer is never exposed. When you speak, you reveal your position, your beliefs, your emotions. When you stay silent, others project their fears onto you. They start asking themselves, what is he thinking? Did I say too much? Did I make a mistake? And while they question themselves, you remain untouched. Silence creates imbalance, and imbalance creates power. This is why silence feels uncomfortable. It removes predictability. It removes safety. Humans crave reaction. They crave feedback. When they don't get it, their mind fills the void. And the mind always fills silence with insecurity. Machiavelli used silence not as absence, but as pressure. He would listen longer than necessary, pause longer than expected, respond later than normal. Those pauses felt heavier than threats, because silence makes people confess without being asked. They talk more. They explain more, they reveal more, and every extra word hands you leverage. Here is the first law of silence. Never be the first to relieve tension. Let others do it. Let them speak. Let them justify. Let them expose themselves. You don't interrupt silence, you weaponize it. By the end of this first stage, people stop talking to you casually. They start talking carefully, because they no longer know what your silence means, and uncertainty is the foundation of authority. But silence alone is not enough, because if used wrongly, it makes you invisible. And Machiavelli never used silence to disappear. He used it to dominate. That is where the next part begins. Silence, when used correctly, doesn't make people quiet. It makes them talk too much. After a while, people can't stand being watched without feedback. They mistake silence for judgment, and judgment makes them nervous. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He knew that most people don't reveal themselves because they are asked. They reveal themselves because they feel pressure, and silence is the cleanest form of pressure. When you remain quiet after someone speaks, they instinctively assume they didn't say enough, so they add more. They clarify, they justify, they soften their words, not because you demanded it, but because silence demanded it. This is how people speak against themselves. They start correcting positions you never challenged. They start apologizing for accusations you never made. They start offering explanations you never requested, and every explanation narrows their freedom. Machiavelli never argued openly. He let silence pull information out of people like gravity. In negotiations, he would listen without reaction. No nodding, no disagreement, no reassurance, just stillness. That stillness unsettled the speaker. They began filling the gap, revealing motives, admitting weaknesses, exposing fears. Because silence makes people feel seen, but not accepted, and acceptance is what they crave. Here is the second law of silence. Never interrupt someone who is explaining themselves. Explanation is a confession in disguise. The more someone explains, the more they limit their future options. They lock themselves into a story, and once locked in, they become predictable. Machiavelli didn't need to expose enemies. He waited until others exposed themselves. This is why silence is dangerous. It doesn't attack, it doesn't accuse, it waits. And people, desperate to escape that wait, hand over their position voluntarily. Silence also shifts hierarchy. When one person speaks and the other only listens, power automatically leans towards the listener. Because the speaker is performing, the listener is judging, and humans instinctively respect the one they feel judged by. That is why silence makes people uncomfortable. It removes reassurance. It forces them to face their own thoughts, and most people don't like what they hear there. This is also why silence works best against emotional people. Emotion seeks response. Emotion feeds on reaction. When it gets none, it collapses. Anger without reaction looks childish. Excitement without validation feels foolish. Confidence without acknowledgement feels fragile. Silence strips emotion of its stage, and once emotion loses its stage, logic disappears with it. This is where Machiavelli stayed ahead. He never rushed to speak. He waited until others said something they couldn't take back. But silence is not passive, it must be timed. Used too early, it looks weak. Used too late, it looks fearful. So Machiavelli used silence at the exact moment people expected resistance. That pause, right when tension peaks, is where control shifts. Silence only works when people feel you are there. Disappear too much, and silence loses weight. Machiavelli understood this balance. He was never invisible. He was never loud. He was present without explanation. Most people think silence means withdrawal. Machiavelli knew better. True silence is not absence, it is controlled presence. When you sit quietly but remain attentive, your silence becomes a signal. I am watching. I am listening. I am deciding. That signal changes behavior. People adjust posture. They choose words carefully. They slow down. Because presence without reaction feels like authority. This is why leaders don't talk constantly. They let the room talk around them. And while others compete for attention, the silent presence absorbs it. Here is the third law of silence. Never disappear, but never explain your presence. When people can't read you, they assume depth, they assume strategy, they assume control. And assumptions work in your favor. Machiavelli stayed close to power without revealing intent. He attended meetings, he listened to arguments, he watched conflicts unfold, but he didn't rush to declare sides. That restraint made everyone cautious, because when you don't know who someone supports, you treat them carefully. Silence creates neutrality, and neutrality creates leverage. Both sides want you. Both sides seek your approval. And approval, when scarce, becomes valuable. This is how silence turns into influence. You don't persuade. You let others persuade themselves that your agreement matters. But silence must be supported by posture. Machiavelli was careful with body language. Stillness, slow movements, minimal gestures. nothing wasted, because wasted movement signals nervousness. Stillness signals certainty. People trust certainty even when they don't understand it. This is why silence combined with calm feels intimidating. Not aggressive, not threatening, just unmovable. Silence also slows time. Conversations feel heavier, moments feel longer. And when time slows, people become aware of their own mistakes. They replay what they said. They question what they revealed. That internal pressure works better than confrontation. Machiavelli let silence do the work. He didn't need to dominate conversations. He dominated after conversations, because silence gives you memory. While others speak emotionally, you remain clear. You remember details, inconsistencies, contradictions. Later, when it matters, those details become weapons. This is why the silent man always seems prepared, because he was never busy talking. But silence creates mystery. But too much mystery turns into danger. Machiavelli understood something most people miss. You must be unreadable, but never suspicious. The moment people feel threatened by what they don't know, they try to remove it. That's why silence must be warm, not cold. Controlled, not hostile. Machiavelli never used silence to humiliate others. He used it to make them comfortable speaking freely. He listened more than he judged. And because he didn't react, people revealed more than they planned. This is the fourth law of silence. Let others feel safe in your quiet. When silence feels safe, people lower their guard. They explain themselves. They justify decisions. They expose motives. And once motives are visible, power shifts. Machiavelli rarely interrupted. Not because he agreed, but because interruption gives relief. Letting someone talk without response creates discomfort. And discomfort makes people over-explain. Over-explanation reveals weakness. Silence becomes a mirror. People see themselves reflected, their fear, ambition, insecurity. And mirrors don't threaten, they simply show. This is why silence, when used correctly, does not provoke resistance. It invites confession. But Machiavelli also knew when to break silence softly. A nod, a calm acknowledgement, a short neutral phrase. Not agreement, just recognition. This prevented his silence from becoming hostility. People felt heard even without approval. That feeling kept him protected, because those who feel heard rarely feel attacked. Another key detail: Machiavelli never weaponized silence publicly. He saved it for private rooms. In public, he appeared reasonable, measured, predictable enough to avoid fear. But in private conversations, silence did the real work. That separation was intentional. Public silence attracts enemies. Private silence builds leverage. He understood perception. You must look cooperative while thinking strategically. Silence helps with both. It hides calculation behind calm behavior. And calm behavior disarms suspicion. This is how Machiavelli stayed close to power without being crushed by it. People didn't fear him, they underestimated him. And underestimation is the safest position of all. Because threats are attacked, mysteries are observed, and observers gather information. Silence also protected him from emotional mistakes. When others reacted impulsively, he waited. And waiting filters reality. False urgency fades, true danger becomes clear. This patience made him seem wise, not loud, not dominant, just composed. And people follow composition in chaos. But silence
Silence builds pressure. But pressure alone is not the weapon. The weapon is what comes after the silence. Machiavelli rarely spoke, but when he did, he ended conversations. Not because he raised his voice, not because he dominated, but because silence had prepared the ground. People expect noise after tension. They expect defense. They expect explanation. Instead, they get one sentence, and that sentence lands heavier than an argument ever could. This is the fifth law of silence. Speak once only when the room is leaning toward you. Timing matters more than content. A powerful sentence spoken too early sounds aggressive. Spoken too late, it sounds weak. But spoken after long silence, it feels final. Machiavelli understood rhythm. He let discussions run, let emotions rise, let positions harden. Then, when everyone had exposed themselves, he spoke calmly. No emotion, no urgency, just clarity. That clarity cut through noise, because clarity after chaos feels like authority. One sentence is enough when silence has done the work. And here's the deeper psychology. People remember the last strong signal. Long debates blur, arguments fade, but the final calm statement becomes the conclusion in their mind. Machiavelli didn't win arguments, he ended them. He also knew what not to say. He avoided moral language, avoided accusations. He spoke in observations, neutral facts, simple consequences. This made disagreement difficult, because you can argue opinions, but facts force reflection. Silence allowed him to choose words carefully. While others spoke emotionally, he was editing, refining, removing weakness. So when he finally spoke, there was nothing to attack. This is why silence increases credibility. It buys time. Time sharpens words. Machiavelli also used silence to make his words feel rare. Rarity increases value. When someone speaks constantly, their words feel disposable. When someone speaks occasionally, people listen. They lean forward. They remember. That is influence.
When people begin waiting for your words, they also begin demanding them. Expectation becomes pressure, and pressure is the enemy of power. Machiavelli understood this early. He knew that influence disappears the moment you become predictable. So he used silence not just to control rooms, but to escape them. This is the sixth law of silence. Never let people feel entitled to your response. The moment people expect your opinion, you lose leverage. Your words become currency, and currency loses value when it circulates too freely. So Machiavelli delayed, not out of fear, not out of confusion, out of strategy. He let urgency pass without reacting. He allowed problems to solve themselves, and when they did, his silence looked wise, because reacting late is often better than reacting fast. Silence creates distance. Distance creates perspective, and perspective reveals which battles are fake and which are real. Most conflicts die if you don't feed them. Machiavelli starved unnecessary battles. He also used silence to avoid responsibility without refusal. When asked for decisions that carried risk, he didn't say no, he didn't say yes, he said nothing. That nothing protected him, because refusal creates enemies, acceptance creates obligation, silence creates ambiguity, and ambiguity keeps doors open. People hesitated to blame him for outcomes he never claimed, yet they still sought his approval. That balance is rare and powerful. Silence also breaks manipulation. Manipulators rely on reaction. They provoke, they pressure, they rush. Silence denies them feedback. Without feedback, their tactics collapse. Machiavelli never argued with emotional people. He let them exhaust themselves. Emotion burns fast. Silence waits. And when emotion fades, control returns to the quiet one. Another reason silence protects power. Words lock you in. Once spoken, they define you. Silence keeps identity flexible. You can adapt, shift, reposition. Machiavelli survived political chaos because he never tied himself too tightly to any statement. His silence kept him light, and in unstable environments, lightness survives. But there's a danger here. Too much silence can make you seem passive, or worse, irrelevant. So silence must be paired with visible action.
At the highest level of power, silence is no longer a tactic. It becomes identity. Machiavelli understood this final truth. Those who speak the least are remembered the most. This is the seventh and final law of silence. Let your actions answer who you. Words explain, actions decide. When silence is paired with action, authority becomes undeniable. Machiavelli didn't announce moves, he executed them. No warnings, no speeches, just results. And results don't argue. Silence made his actions unpredictable. Unpredictability created respect, because people fear what they cannot time. When you don't signal intentions, others cannot prepare defenses. Silence removes anticipation. That is strategic advantage. Machiavelli also knew that true authority doesn't chase agreement. It allows disagreement without reacting to it. Silence in the face of criticism signals strength, not indifference, confidence. Weak people rush to defend themselves. Strong people let outcomes speak, and outcomes always speak louder. By the end of his life, Machiavelli had learned this. The most dangerous man in the room is not the loudest. It is the calmest, the one who listens, the one who waits, the one who moves without warning. Silence sharpens perception. It forces others to reveal patterns, fear, ambition, loyalty. Those patterns become maps, and maps create control. This is why silence feels uncomfortable. It removes noise and exposes truth. In a noisy world, the quiet one stands apart, not because he demands attention, but because attention finds him. Silence is not weakness. It is discipline. It is patience. It is dominance without effort. And once you master it, you no longer need to prove power. Others feel it the moment you enter the room. The room adjusts. The noise fades, and silence takes its place. That is Machiavelli's most dangerous strategy.